There are certain moments in boxing where the noise just stops. No trash talk, no narratives, no sides. Just reality hitting everyone at the same time. And this is one of those moments. Because just days after one of the most brutal, controversial fights we've seen all year, a fight that left one man broken and the other standing tall, something happened completely off script. Something nobody expected. And when word started spreading inside boxing circles about who showed up and where they showed up, people didn't believe it at first. Because this wasn't a call-out, this wasn't an apology tour, and it definitely wasn't content. This was personal. And according to multiple people close to the situation, Anthony Joshua was genuinely caught off guard by it. Let's break this down properly because the context matters more than the headline. Let's start where this really begins. Anthony Joshua versus Jake Paul was never supposed to end quietly. It was loud from the moment it was announced. Netflix backing it, heavyweight billing, a former unified champion versus the most controversial name in modern boxing. The build-up was chaos. Jake talking like Jake always does. AJ calm, measured, professional. Two completely different energies. And when the fight finally happened, it played out exactly how most boxing purists expected. Joshua didn't rush. He didn't get emotional. He didn't entertain the circus. He waited. And then reality arrived. Jake went down. And then down again. By the end of it, Jake Paul was leaving with a shattered jaw, surgery ahead of him, and his boxing future suddenly in question. And here's the key detail people forget. After the fight, Anthony Joshua didn't celebrate like a man who just ended someone's night. He showed respect. AJ didn't pile on. He didn't mock Jake. He didn't embarrass him. In fact, according to reports, Joshua actually went out of his way to check on Jake backstage. That moment didn't go viral. It wasn't clipped, but it mattered. Because for Jake Paul, a guy who spent years being treated like a gimmick, that was one of the first times a real heavyweight champion acknowledged him as a fighter, not a joke. And that moment stayed with him. Fast forward a few days. The internet is still arguing about the fight. Jake is recovering from surgery. AJ is back home in Nigeria, spending time away from boxing. And then, tragedy strikes. Anthony Joshua is involved in a serious car crash. Two people lose their lives. AJ survives with minor injuries. Footage shows him dazed, shaken, pulled from the wreckage. And suddenly, boxing doesn't matter. Belts don't matter. Records don't matter. Debates don't matter. The entire boxing world goes quiet. Because this wasn't about toughness or legacy. This was about how close everything came to ending. Now here's where things take an unexpected turn. Jake Paul responds almost immediately. Not with promo, not with jokes, not with his usual tone. Jake posts a message focused entirely on life, not boxing. No bravado, no self-promotion, just respect. And according to people close to Jake, that reaction wasn't for show. Because Jake has been there. Not the car crash, but the aftermath. The hospital lights, the vulnerability, the realization that the fight doesn't end when the bell rings. Jake had just gone through jaw surgery himself. Liquid diet, pain, recovery, silence. So when he saw AJ injured, shaken, after surviving something far more serious than a boxing match, it hit him differently. And this is where speculation begins, but it's grounded. Multiple sources suggest Jake felt a sense of obligation, not because of the internet, but because of what AJ did for him days earlier. Joshua checked on Jake after the fight. Joshua showed respect when he didn't have to. And in Jake's mind, you return that energy. So the question becomes, did Jake Paul decide to see Anthony Joshua in hospital for the same reason AJ checked on him? Because it was the right thing to do. And if that's true, that's a massive shift in how people see Jake Paul. Because this wasn't about headlines. There were no cameras, no live streams, no dramatic posts beforehand. Jake just showed up. Now imagine this from Anthony Joshua's perspective. You've just been through a traumatic accident. You've lost people close to you. You're sitting in a hospital room processing something far bigger than boxing. And the last person you expect to walk through that door is the man you just broke in the ring. The man whose jaw you shattered. The man the internet says you ended. And yet here he is. Not angry, not bitter, not blaming, just checking on you. That's why people close to AJ describe his reaction as shock. Not because he didn't appreciate it, but because he didn't see it coming. What's being said is that the interaction was short, respectful, and quiet. No long speeches, no emotional outbursts, just two fighters acknowledging something bigger than themselves. Jake reportedly reassured AJ about recovery, told him he'd bounce back, told him he'd be good. Think about how wild that role reversal is. The guy who lost, reassuring the guy who won, and suddenly, the narrative flips. Now let's talk about how the boxing world reacted when this started leaking out. Some people praised it. They said this showed maturity from Jake, growth, perspective. Others weren't convinced. They argued Jake understands optics better than anyone, that this helps soften the image after a career-altering loss. And honestly, both interpretations exist. Jake Paul is calculated, but calculation doesn't cancel sincerity, and Anthony Joshua's reaction is the tell. Because AJ doesn't entertain nonsense. If this felt fake, it wouldn't have landed. But it did. And here's the deeper layer. This moment may actually mark the end of one chapter for both men. For Joshua, surviving a car crash days after a brutal fight puts life into perspective in a way no loss ever could. For Jake, seeing the man who beat him so convincingly almost lose everything overnight reframes what losing even means. When boxing almost becomes irrelevant, something changes. And that's why this story matters. Not because of drama, but because it humanizes two men who've spent years being reduced to narratives. And here's the part that hasn't been talked about enough. This moment didn't just shock Anthony Joshua. It unsettled a lot of people behind the scenes. Because boxing is a sport built on hierarchy, on ego, on dominance, on the idea that the winner moves on and the loser disappears. That's the unwritten rule. And Jake Paul broke it. By showing up, Jake didn't reclaim power. He didn't flip the result. He didn't rewrite the fight. But he did something far more uncomfortable. He refused to play the role people expected him to play. Everyone expected Jake to sulk, to spin, to lash out, or to disappear into rehab and PR silence. Instead, he leaned into humility. And that makes people nervous. Because when someone who's built on noise suddenly goes quiet and sincere, it forces everyone to reevaluate them. That's why some fighters didn't know how to react. Because if Jake Paul can lose badly, suffer real damage, and still show up with respect, then what does that say about the caricature people have been attacking for years? Let's talk about Anthony Joshua's headspace for a second. AJ is not an impulsive guy. He's introspective, sometimes to a fault. Every loss he's taken has visibly stayed with him. Every comeback has been deliberate. Now add this into the mix. A brutal fight, then a near-death experience, then a visit from the man he just defeated. That's a lot for anyone to process. And insiders are saying Joshua has been quieter than usual since. Not withdrawn, just reflective. And that makes sense. Because when you go from celebrating a knockout in front of millions to sitting in a hospital bed realizing how close life came to ending, everything shifts. Your priorities change. Your hunger changes. Your tolerance for nonsense disappears. There's also something symbolic here that nobody's really addressed. Jake Paul showing up for Anthony Joshua mirrors the exact moment when Joshua showed up for Jake. That's not coincidence. That's memory. Fighters remember who treats them like humans when the cameras are off. And when you're injured, vulnerable, stripped of identity, those moments stick. Jake didn't forget that. And that tells you a lot about where his head is right now. Because for the first time since he entered boxing, Jake Paul isn't chasing validation. He's processing consequence. Now let's be real for a second. Does this suddenly make Jake Paul a saint? No. Does it erase years of antics? No. But it does mark a shift. And shifts are dangerous, in a good way. Because the most unpredictable version of someone is the version that's evolving. And boxing doesn't know how to deal with that Jake yet. Here's another angle people are quietly whispering about. This visit might not just be about respect. It might be about closure. Jake Paul took a loss that changed everything. Physically, mentally, publicly. And Anthony Joshua represents the embodiment of real boxing in Jake's journey. Seeing him again, not across a ring, but in a hospital, reframes the entire experience. It turns a violent confrontation into a shared moment of survival. And psychologically, that matters. Because sometimes you don't move forward until you face the thing that ended the chapter. And then there's the business side. Because let's not pretend this didn't ripple through promoters, platforms, and networks. Netflix invested heavily in that fight. The fallout was already complex. Then the crash happens. Then this visit happens. Suddenly, the narrative around both men changes. AJ becomes less of a dominant executioner and more of a survivor. Jake becomes less of a loudmouth and more of a guy who understands cost. That's not a storyline anyone planned, but it's one people are now paying attention to. So whether you love Jake Paul or hate him, whether you rate Anthony Joshua or doubt him, this moment deserves attention. Because it wasn't loud, it wasn't promoted, and it wasn't expected. But it might be one of the most honest moments either man has had in the public eye. If anything else develops from this, and trust me, it will, you'll hear it here first. Because boxing never stops moving, and neither do the stories behind it.